Good afternoon, good morning. We'll get started in just a few minutes um, as we let folks in, but we will be asking folks to complete a Mentimeter. I'm going to put that in the chat, or you can use the QR code on the screen. So while you join, it would be great if you could take a look at this and fill it out. Good morning, good afternoon. Um, Thank you for joining. We'll get started in just a couple minutes. Yes, please fill out the Mentimeter. You can use the QR code, just adding the link to the chat again. Um, right. Looks like uh, we can get started. Thank you everyone for joining us today for our webinar. Wait, what's due now? Inside cognitive overload and the white-knuckle effect among college students with mental health conditions. And we will be featuring Dr. Michelle Mullen is our presenter today. She is an assistant professor of psychiatry and behavioral sciences at UMass Chan Medical School. She is co-PI of the Learning and Working during the Transitions to Adulthood Research and Rehabilitation Training Center and the director and founder of Helping Youth on the Path to Employment, or HYPE. And cognitive overload and white knuckle theory are like one of her babies. So we're so glad you can join us to hear her speak about this. We also have joining us Debbie Nicolelis, who is the training director here at the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research, and for the Learning and Working RRTC. So thank you everyone for being here. And I'm just going to thank our funder, Neidler. This webinar is made possible with funding from the National Institute on Disability, Independent Living, and Rehabilitation Research, also known as Neidler. Grant numbers 90RTE0012, which is the Learning and Working RRTC, and a HYPE grant that Dr. Mullen had, which is the 90DPGE008. And Neidler is a center within the Administration for Community Living in the Department of HHS. And please know that the contents of our webinar don't necessarily represent the policy of Neidler, ACL, or HHS, and they may or may not endorse what we have to say. But thank you again, everyone, for joining us. And I think I'll be turning it over to Dr. Mullen now.
I love the hesitancy, Dee. Thank you. Thank you for kicking us off. I'm going to put the Menti back up on the screen for a second. I want to thank folks for joining us today. So I see some familiar faces in the chat, or I see some familiar names in the chat. It's good to see you folks today. Thank you for coming. So as I introduce myself, I would like for you to scan this or put in the Menti code in the chat. There is also the link that Dee has just reposted. So just identify the top 3 skills that you think are most critical for students to be successful. And as you do that, I'll briefly, because I don't always do a great job at introducing myself. But as Dee had said, I am an assistant professor here at UMass Chan Medical School and the clinical developer of Helping Youth on the Path to Employment, HYPE, and FAST, Focus Skills and Strategy Training, which we'll be talking a lot about today. And while I have lots and lots of interests, as you can see here, I think today many of you will hear the areas around career development, college student success, and executive functioning, but also helping to rewrite some of the damaging narratives about people with mental health conditions. So my illustrious colleague, Debbie Nicolelis, will be monitoring the chat. So please post any of the things in the chat that you want to talk about or have questions, and she will be bringing those to the end in our Q&A session. So to get started, once again, thank you for coming, and I hope you guys are doing your Menti. But the way that I'd like to start today is talking about what we consider our presenting problem. We know that more and more college students on campus have a mental health condition previously diagnosed or identifying symptoms that rise to a level of clinical significance. And post the COVID pandemic era, we're seeing that upwards of 50 to 60% of students on campus meet that threshold for clinical significance. Now, what I will say is that that is actually not the presenting problem, right? So the presenting problem is not that there are more college students on campus with mental health conditions, or at least students that are willing to say it and talk about it, but rather that the dropout rate is staggering. So this group has the highest dropout rate of any other group, freshmen, other disability groups. And so that is actually our presenting problem, which is that college students with mental health conditions and mental health experiences have a cycling enrollment and dropout. So in our previous research, we see that at least 70% of students in one large trial had reported at least one failed attempt at school. 25% had two. And what I would say is probably really staggering is nearly half of the sample had three or more attempts. And so when we start to think about the problem, it is really important to be thinking about how people in the field are talking about that problem. So what is most commonly cited in the literature is mental health symptoms and poor grades. There's also discussion about lack of support and financial aid issues and accommodations in assistive technology and discrimination. But when we start to think about what is the narrative that we tell about college students, we tell a story that suggests that college students have this cycle of enrolling and de-enrolling and dropout and not finishing because of their mental health condition, their symptoms, and poor grades. But when we look at the evidence, that's actually not what we see. So we have a narrative of convenience that it's the mental health condition and it's poor grades. But when we look at students' GPAs, we see in the literature that students with mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, and other types of condition typically have a 3.0 or over. These are not the reasons why people drop out. They don't drop out because their GPA is so low that they're not able to be returning to school. But rather, this narrative of attrition is really based on their mental health condition, is rooted in what I would consider like very old narratives around mental illness. Now, I don't use that language, and some people do, but this idea is that people are too sick to go to school, that school is too stressful, that their mental health, because of their mental health condition, they can't manage school. And when we think about the importance of how we see the problem, that actually designs how we create the solution. So when you think about if that's how we see the problem, then the mental health condition and symptoms, and that's what causes the poor grades, then we're developing a certain types of service. We're seeing the problem in a particular type of lens. And we're also influencing how young people see themselves or college students see themselves. And so when we start to think about like, what does that create? It creates something that may not actually solve the problem that we're seeing. So I'd like to turn my attention for a moment to see what you guys had responded in the chat. I mean, in the Menti rather. So I'm going to give you a second and fumble through my slides. So if you haven't gotten to the Menti yet, this is your time. Now be patient with me.
And as if you're looking for it, Dee has put it in the chat.
Thank you. All right. And the results are in. Let's see what you say. So, I mean, I see we have a particular type of group in our audience today, and I'm loving it. So the most important skill for academic success is resoundingly time management. So all of you have done word clouds before. We've kind of played these guys out. But when we look at what you're saying, there's time management, organization, attention, planning. You guys are talking my language, and this is probably why you're here too. But this idea of following through, the social integration, having social skills. Oh, you guys are really going. Let's see. So when we start to think about what are the main themes that you're putting into the chat, you'll start to see some of the things that we're seeing too, which is these skills around planning, organization, and time management. I'm going to stop sharing that and come back. So, but keep on going. If you haven't responded yet, put it in there because I'm going to be using this later for my other presentations. So let's go back to the presentation. So when we think about what we saw from the literature, that these were the issues that caused students to drop out. When we actually asked students what were the reasons that they had difficulty maintaining matriculation, this is how a group of students responded. So you'll see on the left-hand side, over 70% of respondents identified concentration, time management, stamina, like being able to get through all the things that you need to get through, organization, and prioritizing tasks as their top barriers for maintaining matriculation. I was trained that, and I was trained as a support education provider. So woo woo for all of our support education folks on the webinar today. That over 50%, I was trained that most people needed help managing their psychiatric condition, their mental health symptoms to be able to maintain enrollment in school and to do well. But if you see on the right-hand column, you'll see that managing mental health symptoms actually showed up in around 50% of the sample. It did not escalate to over 70% of the group. And for me, this was a real aha moment because as I was trained, I wasn't thinking in that way. I was thinking about skills. But this was the point where I was like, oh, no wonder they fail out of school, right? No wonder they drop out of school. No wonder they are like, I can't manage this. It's not because they're unable to be there. Everyone got to school meeting the same criteria. And if you get into school meeting that criteria, the idea is that you can finish school. But it was these other skills. And these other skills are what we consider executive functioning skills, right? So we think about those as kind of like the foundation to goal-directed behavior. How do you self-regulate to achieve the things that you want? And everyone goes into school. Most people go into school wanting to finish. It is a very expensive endeavor. Now, there are lots of other reasons why one goes to school, but the idea is that you enroll to complete. And so executive functioning skill are really the foundational components to what we call self-regulated learning. So how do I plan and activate? So get started. How do I monitor? Am I doing the right thing? What's my progress towards accomplishing the goal? And how do I minimize my distractions to achieve this goal, which is the control piece? And then at the end, and periodically through it is how am I feeling about the process? How are things going? And that's the reaction and reflection. So people who use more strategies related to this do better in school and do better at work. And so executive functioning skills, however, helps to support those types of behaviors. So executive functioning skills are related to lots of things. They develop over age. They develop based on our experiences and opportunities, and they're affected by other things that we experience in our lives. There are a few of these executive functioning domains that we think about and talk about, but really it's around how do I plan? How am I going to achieve my goal? And you'll see difficulties in planning where people have a hard time meeting deadlines, for instance. We think about reasoning, so this sequential and logical way of solving a problem or going about a task. And you can see those things in difficulty with problem solving, or you can see it in writing structure, attentional control. So being able to manage one's attention and direct their attention. We often can see difficulties with this with students who are unable to finish assignments or who are picking up their phone in class instead of, taking notes. Automatic responses, this too is around reducing the urge to do certain things. And that could be resisting, interrupting, checking your phone while doing your work, like a lot of the technology disruptions that all of us have experienced that. And then working memory. And working memory is the ability to hold and process information at the same time. So the best example of this is note-taking, where someone is talking and you're writing down the information that they said, but they're still continuing to talk. And so you're holding what they're saying and writing it down. That's the best example of working memory. So when we think about executive functioning skills and their importance, what we know is that this develops through the mid-20s for most people. We also know that certain folks take longer to develop their executive functioning skills. We know that there are certain things that impact executive functioning skills: trauma, toxic stress, poverty, negatively affects the neurodevelopment and the skills that are associated with that. What I will say, however, is that there is real research that is happening around executive functioning skills that are showing very, very powerful impacts of the benefits. So what executive functioning training is seeing a real reduction in the achievement gap that we've been seeing between students, white, brown, and Black students, and students from different socioeconomic status. We're also seeing that executive functioning has a certain type of power in academic outcomes, where executive functioning has been seen as predictors of educational achievement. So equal to or better than IQ. So many of us can think about our super smart friends that can never get anything done, right? So like, it doesn't matter if they're super smart, if they don't have these skills to organize their work and to get their work done. So people who have these advanced or super refined executive functioning skills and strategies can outperform people who are on, in standardized testing are smarter than they are. What's the best part about executive functioning skills, though, is what I would say is that they're both malleable and they're teachable. So can we teach skills and strategies to work around the things that we aren't naturally very good at, or we don't have very well trained, or that we have less bandwidth for? And the answer is yes, which is amazing. So the research is showing that executive functioning is a protective factor. So it helps lots of things, especially related to socioeconomic status and later economic development. And it also bridges this achievement gap that we see between historically discriminated communities. So one of the things that I want for you guys to consider, and I can't see you, so I would love for you to use the chat to show your reactions. But what would happen to you if I collected your calendars, now I can't threaten it today because we're not together, but if I took your calendars and with no idea that you would get them back, what would happen to you? Now, sometimes in presentations, um, people are able to like speak out and say like, oh, I'd be fine. And I wonder when people say I'd be fine, I think like, oh, you probably have a paper calendar. You probably don't have a lot of competing demands, or the things that you have to do are kind of rinse, repeat. You always know what you're doing. But one time in a presentation, I said this prompt, and a woman literally clasped her necklace, like her pearls. She clasped her pearls, and she's like, oh, like this idea of someone taking her calendar was like, like she couldn't even handle the idea of it. So, Debbie, are people reacting in the
I
chat?
mean, yes, they are. So thank you, everybody. Hot mess was the first and immediate response. LOL, the same. People saying I wouldn't be able to function. Other folks are saying, I'll give you mine. A little bit anxious, but I could give it to you. I'd be lost without it. Um, yeah, would not show for anything. Can't keep it in my head, right? Have a paper calendar as a backup would be
Oh, a paper
challenging.
calendar is a backup.
Yeah.
Well, that person probably doesn't forget a lot of things if you have electronic and a paper. But if I took both, then we'd probably be in a bad place. So if I took your calendars and I took your to-do list, like if I took all the things that help you to put into place the things that you need to remember, the question is, how many of you would know what you're doing today? And probably a fair amount would be like, yeah, I could figure out the rest of today. But then the question is, do you know what you have to do tomorrow? And then do you know what you would have to do next week? And you can still put in the chat your feelings around this.
Yeah. Somebody said today, yes. Tomorrow, maybe not.
Maybe not.
Yeah. Next week, no. My kids and
Yeah.
I would be lost, right?
Yes,
Mhm.
precisely.
Yeah.
But then think about how you would feel week over week if you didn't have a place to put your appointments, if you didn't have a place to put your to-do list, if you had to remember what you had to do at work and at school and at home and all the things. So when you start to think about that, many of you may feel like this. And the best way that I can describe this is, for those of you who are students, you know exactly what this is. For those of you who are parents, the way that I think about this is like you're cooking dinner and you have 4 pots going on, and the dog starts barking and the kid starts crying, and your phone rings and it's an important phone call that you have to pick up, and someone rings the doorbell. You essentially move into cognitive overload. There's too much coming at you and you're holding too much. And this is the place where we say that you have reached your cognitive overload. And when I remove your calendars and your to-do list, because you have those, you have too much stuff floating in your head. And that is what brings us to cognitive load theory. So cognitive load theory suggests that there is a finite amount of resources that one has. And it's split over into these 3 compartments. Intrinsic load, that's this idea of like, how hard is it for me to learn whatever I'm doing? What's the complexity of the information? How hard am I working to figure that out? The second part is germane load, linking new information to current information. How am I making sense of this? How is this fitting in with what I already know? And if it's completely new, that's the heaviness of the intrinsic load. How do I process that? And then the last part is what we call extraneous load. And extraneous load is all of that space junk that I just influxed into your mind because I took your to-do list and I took your calendars. So all the things that you get out of your head and you put in your calendar so you never have to think about again, those are the things, the asteroids in your mind that is just smashing things up, right? So when we think about cognitive load, it's what am I learning and how hard is it? How hard am I working to connect it to things that I already know? And how much stuff do I have in my mind that is taking up essentially these cognitive resources? So cognitive load is saying like, okay, we all have an amount of cognitive resources, and the load, the heaviness of the load, if you will, is determined by how difficult the task is. So the more resources are used for heavier loads. So for some of us, taking a physics course is a very heavy load. For other people, it's not, because the complexity to them is very easy. Some of us, the cognitive load of English class is wildly heavy. For others, it's not. So it's not the same for everyone. But when we think about cognitive load, there are two cognitive factors that are required or that are heavy tax here. One is working memory and one is attention. And so those are two areas of executive functioning. Working memory, remember, is the things that are coming in and holding it. And attention is being able to get information in. So what is true for everyone is if working memory is exceeded, so you can't take any more in and can't hold any more in, something called cognitive overload happens, which is what we just described as that human trying to make dinner and their house explodes. So when cognitive overload occurs, you don't have the sufficient cognitive resources to meet the demands. You just can't take any more in. But even more so, you can't take any more in, but you also can't do any more, right? So there is this response and your performance decreases. And this is true for every human, not only people with mental health conditions. So I want to state that this is a typical reaction from everyone once we reach cognitive overload. So when we think about cognitive load, everyone is managing that. The idea is that we're balancing it. So a higher load in one area reduces the bandwidth in other areas. So we know when we think about, remember that brain, there is that intrinsic load, which is like what's coming in and how difficult that is. That really relies on attention. You have to be paying attention to get the information in. And memory, working memory, is required for germane load. How am I learning this stuff and connecting to this stuff? So that is the memory component. And extraneous load, as I described earlier, is the junk that is in your head. And when we think about that, we need the skills and strategies to manage intrinsic load, as the complexity of the information, the germane load, how am I connecting it? But we also need to clear the extraneous load so there's more cognitive bandwidth to be able to manage those two more difficult things of intrinsic and germane load. So how do we sort and organize what's important and keep things aligned and eliminate distractions? So the greater amount of working memory allows for a greater amount of extraneous load, right? And the rigor and complexities increase. What happens is that students start to change in their performance, right? So we need to start thinking about, like, how do we manage the extraneous loads? We do a lot in our services or thoughts around, like, how do we help people to manage their attention and what are accommodations in assistive technology? But when we start to think about how do we manage the rest of the components, it's something that we should start to pay attention to. So what we'll often see is this idea of, like, forgetting. Oh, I forgot that. And so that is actually a protective factor to increase the capacity for intrinsic and germane load. It also means that we probably don't have strategies for what is considered cognitive offloading. So cognitive offloading is essentially your calendar, your to-do list, saying to your friends, remind me to do this thing, or can you do that thing, right? So cognitive offloading is essentially using external tools to store information. So this diminishes the things that you hold in your head. So it increases your capacity of what we call limited cognitive resources. I only have so much to give. I only have so much that's there. So what that does by offloading some of these things, you reduce the demand on what is available currently. So when you think about, like, your computer, often it says, like, there's no more memory left, like, clear the deck, like, get rid of the things that you need. And so that is also what's happening here. If you don't have a cognitive offloading strategy, however, you get to this place where it fell off my to-do list. I just didn't remember how to do it. But it is essentially, how do you clear the decks to allow yourself to do the work that is required, managing the demands. So when we think about cognitive load, it is very easy to consider what that looks like for college students. It is wildly predictable, right? So it is low at the beginning of the semester. It is low at the beginning of the semester. And then it's like that roller coaster, right? It's that click, 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 click up to the top. So we can see that the demands like steadily increase. And then what happens around midterms? You are at the top and you are in free fall, right? So this is what happens. There is just this like build up for load. So what happens in the beginning of the semester, many of you know this, it's new semester, new me, new year, new me, where like the semester behind is behind us. But there is an increased reliance on self-regulated learning, right? That idea of like, how am I progressing towards my goals? And these executive functioning skills and strategies that help to maintain all of these demands as we're going through the semester. Because one of the things that happens in school is that you have like a set of competing demands. You have 5 bosses or 4 bosses, depending on how many courses you're taking, and none of them care about what the other one is doing. So you could have papers, assignments, tests all falling on the same day. So being able to manage the competing demands of school is incredibly important. So when we start to think about the implications of under-refined skills, then we start to see what we may be missing in services and what we may be missing around this narrative. So we know that what is true for all students is that there is a prolonged period of cognitive load. You are intended to be a learner. That means you are all the time being in the face of intrinsic load, right? So like you are learning new information and it may vary in complexity. And often we talk about identifying classes that are a combination of easy and hard, because a lot of hard classes drive people into this cognitive overload phase, which is, that is real for all students. So students with under-refined or underdeveloped executive functioning skills start to struggle to keep up with the constant demands of student life. And that is typically, it feels easy in the beginning of the semester. And then, as you know, it starts to peak and it becomes very, very difficult. So we'll see things with difficulty with organizing and time and task management, remembering. And so once that starts to happen, as performance decreases, stress increases. And that's true for everyone. So once demands exceeds what we are able to manage, everyone experiences an increase of stress. And everyone experiences a decrease in performance because you are now in sustained overload. So for students who have under-refined executive functioning skills and strategies, it also hinders the things that you want to do at that time, which is get help, figure out how to get your assignments done. How do you take care of yourself? Because you are now in overload. The thing that I will say is that executive functioning skills and strategies change with every component of academia as well as work. So every time you rise to the next level, your executive functioning skills and strategies have to kind of level up and become more refined to meet the demands of the environment. So the demands of environment of high school are often not the same as when people get into college. So just to think that you're constantly evolving this set of skills to meet the requirements of the environment. So when we start to think about cognitive load, I was in my PhD program, and this was something that was very real to my experience. This idea of like white knuckling it, like you are just holding on for dear life. So we've introduced White-Knuckle Effect theory, which is an alternate explanation for what we see for college students with mental health conditions or for college students that have higher attrition rates. And so this is actually like a much better explanatory theory than mental health symptoms and poor grades, because what it suggests is that for students who have fair, good grades and high attrition, that without the adequate executive functioning skills, students are left with a tremendous amount of personal effort to manage those expectations. So we know that we see a lot of students like on these pathways, which is like people are, once you hit the white knuckle, you are either holding on for dear life and you make it through, or you crash and burn. So the crash and burn often looks like the incompletes, the withdrawals. But what we often see is people getting to the end of the semester and they don't make it to finals. They don't finish their last project because they have just been holding on for so long that their grip finally slips. But it's almost always between the midterm and final part, right? So like once the pressure and the demands become very high. So this is why we're seeing GPAs that are like pretty good, but are periodically impacted with this kind of crash and burn cycle. So some semesters they do great, and other semesters they struggle, and they struggle to be able to maintain all of the classes that they had enrolled for. This also then better explains the repeated attempt history. So for any of us that have been in school recently or currently, you know what it looks like to finish a semester. You are exhausted. You're emotionally exhausted. You're physically exhausted, right? I often say I would much rather be tired physically than cognitively. It is a different type of exhaustion. And so oftentimes people take these extended breaks to recover from that type of exhaustion. So when we look at this periodic like entrance and exit from school, this white knuckle theory starts to explain what we're seeing in both GPAs and behavior of the people that we want to support. So the white knuckle theory looks a little like this. And I think I have to refine my graphics a little bit better. So if anyone has any ideas, I'm open to that. So if we start on the left-hand side, this idea of like people come to college or they progress through college and they reach this point where their executive functioning skills do not meet the demands of their classes or where they end up at school. And from there, they have experience of increased cognitive load. They're doing a lot. And that moves to feelings of stress. Now, stress is not necessarily bad. It's often quite motivating, like, oh my God, I need to get this stuff done. But if people do not have the skills, the strategies, and the supports to be able to do that, then they move into cognitive overload. Cognitive overload for all humans then decreased performance. So now we're in the all human range. And once we're in decreased performance and you're a college student and your only job is to be able to stay a college student, then we move into feelings of distress. And when we start to think about why upwards of 60% of college students are saying that they meet these criteria for more serious mental health conditions, people start to feel those feelings of increased symptoms. So we know that distress is harmful for everyone. And if you have a mental health condition, we also know that that then may trigger an exacerbation of symptoms. And so when we start to think about when we move to this side of the continuum, this is what we see. And remember, when we define the problem as symptoms and not finishing classes and poor grades, if that's what we want to see, that's what we see. And that is a reactive symptom-based support. What we're calling for is a preventative, specialized level of supports. It's more of that model. What we know is that there are personal factors that affect people's ability or cognitive load, right? So hunger affects your cognitive load, your mental health condition, trauma, discrimination, basic life needs, life events, death in the family. There are real things that affect people's the bandwidth of their cognitive load. What we also know is that under-refined executive functioning skills also reduces the ability to connect to academic and mental health resources. So now we're in this cycle. And when we start to think about the White-Knuckle effect, if we're only looking at this red circle here to the right of the increased symptoms and crash and burn, then that's the problem we're trying to solve for, as compared to earlier in the continuum when developing the specialized services and supports to develop those executive functioning skills. So I'd like to introduce FAST, which is what has prompted this current theory. So FAST is, it's referred to as focus skill and strategy training. It was initially called FAST, which was focus academic skill training. So if you see it in the literature like that, but essentially it is a cognitive remediation intervention. And a colleague of mine was like, that's kind of a mouthful. You may want to change it to like be more accessible. So we call it a coaching intervention. So it's 12 sessions, 1 hour sessions that focuses specifically on executive functioning skills and strategies. It is compensatory, which means we're not trying to restore or build neural pathways, but rather, if we struggle with memory, then we're going to develop strategies around how do you best remember? What are the things that you need to do so that you don't forget? This idea of protecting. So in FAST, we leverage the students' goals. Like, what are the things that you want to do so that we're continuously coming back to their goals throughout the 12 sessions, the curriculum. And while it's manualized and it is scripted, there are places where or throughout that we individualize the skill development so that we're always going back to the student barriers and to their goals. So it's relevant, it's individualized, but manualized. Now, the cool thing about FAST is that it uses gamification. So we always teach something as a game first, and then we embed it in practice, and we use deliberate and distributed practice, which means that we start small and we practice, 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 and we build up through scaffolded learning. So FAST has 4 essential modules and 12 sessions. Perspective memory, so remembering to remember, and what I would call that's the secret sauce. So the introduction, the figuring out like what are the things that I need to do, calendaring, to-do lists. We move to attention, which is like, how do I remember people's names? How do I bring information in? Memory, because we know that those 2 pieces are critical to managing cognitive load. And cognitive flexibility. One of my most favorite traits or characteristics in someone is to be able to think through and not get stuck in a problem. So FAST teaches what we would consider complex skills. And when we think about these skills, how do we usually teach them? So if you were thinking of someone that you're supporting or serving, and they don't know how to manage their time, you say, well, put it in your calendar. You tell them, you should on them, you should do this, you should do that. We don't actually have the strategies, and often many of us do not even have these skills ourselves to then be able to break them down and teach them in the behavioral components, because most times people are not missing the entire skill, they're missing behaviors, certain and critical behaviors. And so what we're trying to do in FAST is to develop habits. So what are durable habits? And once you routinize things, you no longer have to think about them. So if you're not thinking about them, you're not taking up cognitive load. Most of you do not think one moment about what you do in the morning. You get up and you have your routine. You routinize it. And so that is what we're trying to build here in FAST, which is that when you get an assignment, you put it in your calendar, you break it down into tasks. So it becomes a set of very effective and sophisticated habits. But most of the time, practitioners do not have those skills or knowledge or awareness of how to teach these things. So in FAST, there is a structured agenda every time. We start in the same way. There's a review of the home exercise because everyone gets a little lovin's to go home and practice with. And then there's a review and overview of the session. We introduce a topic, what's the rationale, the benefit, what do they currently do in that area? And then we practice it with a game. And so what that does is it isolates the strategy itself to show how helpful it is in like an everyday, well, maybe not every day, but in a fun task. So like, the side-by-side pictures of find the difference. And so how people go about that process and isolating a skill or a strategy that we're trying to show. And then we move to the application to real life. So now let's use that skill or that strategy and apply it to what it looks like to be a student or to be a worker. And then there's a home exercise. And so when I think about like some of the FAST strategies that are particularly helpful, is this idea of like time and task management, that perspective memory is critical for people. And so when we think about like the space garbage, the extraneous load, that is often the things that can be cleared from people's minds if they have the strategy and they understand the benefit, and then they have the skill scaffolding, so the support to do it. And so that is calendaring, it's to-do lists, it's how does to-do lists and calendaring come together. But it's also this idea of prioritizing tasks. And we all fall victim to this, which is sometimes or all the time, we do the things that are easier to do first and we wait to do the harder things, or we do not initiate, or we procrastinate. And so how do we prioritize tasks that we're doing the things that are most important, and being able to manage our time? The other things that we teach are using self-talk to keep ourselves structured and on task and to remember. For those of us that are older in this group, it's like you get up to go get something, you're halfway across the room and you're like, what am I doing? What am I supposed to be getting? But if you get up and you're like, okay, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get this, then you don't forget because you're using self-talk to go get it. And we often think about self-talk as something we're saying out loud, but self-talk is often what is inside our head. So training ourselves, sometimes it's outside and sometimes it's inside. When I need the most clarity of the thing that I'm doing, I completely do self-talk out loud. If I'm doing something like, okay, now I need to do this and now I need to do that. So it's both. We practice and we help to develop scaffolding around not losing things. So this idea of automatic places, once again, that is just clearing the deck. So like if you're always losing your keys, you don't know where your books are, you don't know where your pocketbook is, that's an easy solve. Everything can just have an automatic place. Let's have a home for it. Like my bag always goes here. My keys always goes there. When I take something out of my book bag, I put it back in when I'm done. So those are the types of habits. And now many people don't think that these things are powerful in and of themselves, but they are incredibly helpful for people who feel disorganized and don't have these larger set of skills or strategies. We also teach a lot around encoding and retrieval, because as a student, that's what you need to demonstrate. You need to learn stuff and you need to be able to pull it out when you need it. As well as when do we do only one thing versus when do we do a lot of things at the same time? And for those of us that are old enough to know that at one point multitasking was supposed to be the best thing, and you were the smartest, most productive person if you could do 1,000 things at one time, we now know that that was a false narrative that many of us bought into. But what is different for young adults today than, let's say, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is the amount of inputs that they have, that they are almost constantly multitasking. The AirPod in the ear is a real thing. The thing that we spend a lot of time doing in FAST is this time and task management. And so many of us struggle with this. It's a common experience, but it's essentially the most complex skill I think that we teach, but also the most important. So while everything else in FAST is taught and scaffolded, like we repeat it, time and task management, this idea of calendaring and to-do list perspective memory, can last the entire 12 weeks until someone has really got it down. So time management is, what am I doing with my time and how much time do I have? And task management is, what do I have to do? What do I have to do? And so you can't have one or the other. You have to have both, but some people are primarily time people and other people are primarily task people. I'm a task person, which means that I can get lost in time. I had a friend in graduate school who was a time person. She was like, I have an hour. That's all I'm spending on this. And when that hour is done, I'm done. And I was like, that is the most wild thing I've ever heard in my whole life. But then we teach these companion strategies of how do we prioritize? How do we chunk our work? How do we do a certain set of things and then move to another set of things? And then how do we use these cognitive offloading strategies to be able to manage ourselves? So the idea of reminders is incredibly helpful. So being able to set a reminder so you're keeping track of time, or to remember to do something later. And then we teach the skill of managing distractions, because that is just a real thing. The one thing I wanted to talk a little bit about that is a tool and a strategy that you can help use yourself, or for people that you support, is this Eisenhower matrix. It is a very helpful tool to help people determine what is urgent, what's important, and what do I need to prioritize. So this is a matrix, essentially a quadrant, where important is on the y-axis and the urgent and not urgent is on the x-axis. So when something is important and urgent, that is obviously something that you need to do. It is important to you and it is due right away, if not right now. So these are things with deadlines and real consequences. What we often see is that people work in these urgent quadrants. And we want to shift people into thinking about the important quadrant. So the idea of like, okay, something is coming up. I need to schedule it. It is not urgent, meaning it's not due right now. It's not due tomorrow, but soon it will be urgent. But if I can do time management, task planning, taking my work and chunking it into tasks so that by the time my 20-page paper is due, I'm not cramming the night before. So this idea of important and not urgent. The other components are when we're operating in the urgent but not important. And so many of us default to that, meaning that this needs to get done. It is not important to do, but it is urgently being asked for me to do it. This is often requests from other people. Can you walk my dog? I need this, right? So this idea of like, okay, if I have stuff that I have to do, is can someone else do it or do I need to do it? And when you are not in a position of power, sometimes you don't have things to delegate, but then you have to identify, is this the thing that I'm using for my time or is it not? And then the last one, a lot of us spend a lot of time in, and that is this red box here, the not important, not urgent. And many of you know that once you open Instagram or TikTok, that is not a quick look, right? That is a distraction that is going to bring you into like the sinkhole of hours potentially. So this idea of how do we minimize our distractions and how do we get rid of unnecessary tasks? This is a very helpful tool as a planning tool for people to be like, okay, what is due? What do I have on my plate? So when we start to think about that, then what I didn't mention earlier in this earlier slide is that one of the things that we do in time and task management is that we take all the syllabi and we put it into someone's calendar. They put it into their calendar. We don't actually do it, but we help to develop the habits of putting the things in. So then when we are prioritizing our time, what are the things that are urgent or coming up? This idea of weekly planning, monthly planning, daily planning. There is a very cool human, I don't know them, but they have built amazing tools that help to bring the Eisenhower matrix into everyday life. And there are two versions of it. So if you go to Blog Relay, I don't know them, I don't benefit from this, but what I would say is like someone's going to drop it in the chat, either Dee or Debbie, and click on it, open it, and you'll see that there are two packages. You can download this as an Excel, or you can download it as a Google Sheet. And you write your to-do list and you check like, when is it important? When do I have to do it? Is it important? Is it urgent? And then it pre-populates where you are in which of these quadrants. If I could kiss Blog Relay, I totally would. So shout out to Blog Relay. So this is one of those tools that you can help, and both yourself, I use it now too, as well as if you support people. So shout out to Blog Relay. So when we think about the power of executive functioning skills, it was really clear to me when students were saying, like, I struggle with organizing, I struggle with getting things in on time. And I figured like, if we could teach that, then we can ameliorate a lot of problems for students to be successful. There are a lot of services available for symptom management, for stress management. There are not a lot of services that are available to teach these skills that we would consider a part of the hidden curriculum. They are expected to be developed en route, but very rarely taught at like a foundational level. And when you think about when we teach people about calendaring and time management, task management, it's in elementary school when they get their first agenda. But once they move to middle school and more students are moving to their phones, we never actually teach them how to do it on their phones or even in paper. We just expect that they do it. And so the hidden curriculum of executive functioning skills it's real. And so when we started looking at the data related to FAST, that's where the white-knuckle effect theory came from. And so the data supporting the white-knuckle effect theory, as well as our system call for systems change, is really rooted in data. And so FAST has been tested in 3 RCTs. The first one was just FAST alone. And we did community recruitment of college students from 17 colleges and universities in the New York metro area. And students got FAST only, FAST only and information only. And there was a person on the research team who was trained. It was a master's trained, what then became a cognitive specialist, but they didn't come in like that. And we had done a neurocognitive assessment to identify these areas upon entrance and then over time. The second trial is what we call Hype on Campus. And we did this at one large state university. And we provided Hype services, support education services, plus FAST, and then an information-only control. Here we use MSW student interns who provided the intervention. And then last, we tested it for young adults at work. So we called that FAST at Work. It was a small pilot, but an RCT, and it was a digital intervention that was provided remotely. Hold on a second. Oh, here we go. I think I may have gone to, okay. So the outcomes that we saw here was when we administered FAST, students were more likely to academically persist. So if you remember, I had noted that there is an estimated attrition rate of 86%. But what we think that is the cycling in and out of school. And so students who received FAST were 7 times more likely to persist for 1 more academic year. So when you think about the attrition rate that people experience with these types of conditions, that was astounding. So the best part, so we saw a statistically significant outcome, which means it is not likely to happen due to chance. But what's more important is what we saw was the effect size. So this was a smallish sample, not too small, but it was 72 people. And the effect size was over 1, as you see here. That italicized D is the Cohen's D. And essentially what that tells you is it's similar to, I use this example, and sometimes I get it wrong, so bear with me. But this idea of when, when there's an oil spill and all of our cute little animals get covered in oil, it would be like the effect size is the different type of soap that you can use. So like you can get dollar store soap and try to wash these cute little duckies off and it doesn't get off the oil. And then you can use palm olive and maybe that does a little bit better. But what we see is that the Dawn is the most powerful and it strips away the grease, right? So that's what the D is, which is the smaller the D, 0.2, 0.3. That's what we typically see of psychosocial and educational interventions. But this D over 1 is the Dawn of effects. So it is a very strong effect on academic persistence. We also saw large effects on working memory and attention. We saw the Godzilla effect on self-efficacy. It was almost embarrassing what we had seen. And that made really good sense to me, actually, because when we asked students, how many cognitive barriers are you experiencing at the end, there was really significantly lower, but they used more cognitive strategies. So what that said to me is if you teach them the skills, they'll use it and they'll have less barriers and more strategies. So they will feel like they are more self-efficacy. It made perfect sense. So that was in the FAST trial alone. When we did this on Hype on Campus, we saw that students who completed FAST had a greater number of courses, a greater number of credits. They actually had a reduction of symptoms, which was an aha moment for me. This is what really led to this idea of like the cognitive overload and burden. They also reported fewer cognitive barriers and greater strategies. And when we tested this at FAST at work, we saw that students identified that they were doing better at work, and they too had fewer greater strategies and fewer cognitive barriers. So when we think about the importance of these outcomes, there is a part about what we do differently as providers, but there's also a part of how we do things differently as a part of our system. So entire systems are motivated by enhancing retention and graduation, both community mental health, higher education, Department of Labor, everyone wants that. Financial systems, right? So when we start to think about like what we identify as the problem and how we define it, it really matters, because whatever you see as a problem is how you're going to design your services. So if we're designing for symptom exacerbation, if that's what we want to design for, then that's the outcome that we have in mind. And when we think about, many of you are wildly aware about the discussion of mental health crisis on campus, and there's never enough counselors. But when we define this as a symptom-based issue, then there's a disproportionate weight on services, mental health services on campus. But if the part of the problem is not thinking about this idea of symptoms and crash and burn, but really thinking about these underdeveloped executive functioning skills and how that starts much earlier in the process, if this is the problem that we're trying to solve for, then that distributes the burden or the responsibility or the accountability across many areas of our campus and many areas of our field. So when we start to identify the earlier precursors of dropout, then we start to redistribute efforts. We start to redistribute FTEs. We start to fund different initiatives. And so when we start to think about this from the intervention side, really modifying FAST so it's not just for people with mental health conditions, because what you've heard today is a universal experience. This idea of many students struggle with this, and some students struggle more than others. And it could be folks with mental health conditions. It could be folks who are exposed to toxic stress. It could be folks who have a greater number of adverse child events. It could be folks that live in poverty. It could be folks that are hungry. It could be folks that have really serious life events. So you start to paint a picture of exactly our college campus right now. That's what our college campus looks like today. It is not the college campus of the 1950s, right? But really lots of different types of folks are on campuses, as they should be. But how we start to design our services around being successful and retention and graduation, I think, is critical for student success, not just those with mental health conditions, but all students that come from experiences that do not set them up well or easy for graduation. So I wanted to share a couple of opportunities that are happening in our group, and then we're going to open it up for some questions. So what am I saying? So we have some future research and practice partnerships. On our next slide, I'll have a QR code for a particular one, but we are looking to adapt our FAST intervention for lots of different age groups and settings. So middle school and high school, first year experience, as I had said earlier, students without mental health conditions, athletes, but we're also looking at some cultural adaptations and modifications for other at-risk youth and young adult groups, particularly those that are economically disadvantaged. So if you come from poverty, and if you're in an impoverished area, you have less access to opportunities to develop these skills and less And certain academic environments, like your middle school and high school, elementary school, are not funded to be able to provide additional experiences. We also know that system-involved youth have a certain type set of experiences that then make it more difficult to become successful later. And so being able to access folks earlier in that process, such as young adults or teens in foster care or criminally involved, as well as those who are from neurodivergent groups. We are particularly interested in how this works in real life, right? So we are starting a trial to look at some implementation, but we are wildly interested in helping people to implement FAST in many different types of ways. And we'll be offering a FAST Institute coming up to train providers. But I think the thing that I would really like to emphasize here is that we have an upcoming research opportunity for people who are on college campuses. And so we would like to test FAST in an academic support center. So typically where you have, your tutoring services, your writing labs. Historically, we've tested FAST in disability services, in psych services, and then as a mobile service. But here we want to embed it within an academic support. And to us, it seems to make sense because those centers are designed to focus on academic persistence. How do we get you through the end of the semester, right? How do we get you so that you pass your classes and can move on to the next semester? So for that, any of you who are interested in exploring this QR code will pop up and automatically generated email, so you don't have to think too much about it and say, hey, I'm interested in bringing FAST to my campus, and then we'll reach out to you. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Debbie to help identify any particular type of questions or thoughts from our group, and I will bring down the slide in a moment, but this is our contact email, and this is for anyone who's interested in connecting on LinkedIn. This is my QR code. Thank you, Debbie.
Yes. Thank you, Michelle. This was like chock full of incredible information. And,
Oh, thank you.
I like that you sort of ended with a call to action for us to really rethink about how we design our services. You're getting some applause as we go. So thank you, everybody, for the love. I think, one question that people came into the webinar with and are asking kind of after hearing your presentation is, where can people get these tools and resources, and how can they share them with the people that they serve? So I think that's a good place to start.
Yeah. Well, what I will say is that there is a 17-year gap from research to practice. Oh, well, yes, I can. There's a 17-year gap from research to practice, and we don't really have that much time, honestly. So I understand that people are like, how can we get it? And I think the answer is it is not widely available. So reach out to us and we can think about ways that we can make it easy to bring this to your campus or to your services. There's an importance of doing research, and the research helps to say it works or it doesn't. And I feel as if we have hit the place where we see that FAST works. And now it's really moving from research to practice. I can research FAST to the day is long, right? So this idea of like, there's always more research to do, but we have some really concerted efforts, and I am wildly interested in moving it into practice. And so if anyone is interested in doing that, so am I. And so please reach out and we can think about what that looks like.
Sorry, Michelle, I'm gonna bust in. Could you take us back a slide or two with the QR code for campuses that may be interested?
Yeah, sorry, I'm on the wrong slide.
And it'll
we go.
take you
Thank
to
you.
the same email, hype@UMass.
This is the easy one, the easy version, scan it and go. So that's a very long answer to it's not yet commonly available. And a part of my work moving forward is to change that. So we
Yeah.
actively write grants with people to bring it to their campus or to their institution. If people have, a windfall of money that they have to spend before the end of the contract year. And we often know that's where we are right now, typically, is that places are trying to spend down their funds before they have to give it back. This is a very good option to do that, or designing their budgets to be able to include it moving forward. But we are wildly interested in training staff to provide it, and for people to receive it.
Yeah. That was going to be my next comment slash question is, how do people get trained? So I think people are really interested because you all know who are here with us how great the need is
Yeah.
for students on your campus or in your services. So, getting trained to do that, I think is really important. And I wonder if you could comment, Michelle, on the kinds of supports. Somebody had a question in here that part of the question, I think, was around what kind of support is there for the providers in FAST to bring this kind of help to the people that they serve. So I wonder if you can comment on the ways in which FAST kind of gives the provider the tools they need
Yeah.
to be able to do this work.
Yeah, that's a good question, which I don't think I did a very good job at describing earlier, because many people don't have these skills. I shouldn't say it like that. There are many people who don't have these skills. That's true. But most people don't know how to teach them. So those are hard skills to teach, especially because they're complex skills and they're interrelated. And so I think that's why we often refer to FAST as the secret sauce, because it really requires the provider to do very little, but to attend to the person. What is the goal? What are the barriers? And you really just have to be focused on what is your intention in these sessions. And the intention is to develop the skill or to identify where there's a gap in the behavior, or to be able to, it's really a coaching model. So it is intended to be positive. It is intended to be structured. It is intended to get a result. And so that's why the manualized curriculum is so helpful, because you're not trying to figure out what to say next. It's there for you. And so I think one of the cooler things that are embedded in the set of tools is that you have a manual, and you have what the person does, and what Debbie says, it's elbow to elbow. So you're sitting next to someone and you're talking and you're working through these worksheets. But providers, when they're initially trained, have a facilitator's guide. So what do I say when? What do I do now? What do I need now? And so there's very little figure it out yourself. Sometimes there is, but that's within the context of stylistically, how do you do something? I think that probably the most promising thing for me is when we trained master's level interns. So they're essentially bachelor's level students that were in their master's program on way to get their MSW. So they were in graduate school, but they just entered graduate school. And these students were able to learn it and do it really well based on the manual, the facilitator's guide, and technical assistance. And so we train to the manual and we support the provider, and we provide oversight and real constructive feedback. So like, hey, in this session, these are the things that went really well. And this is the thing that I would keep in mind for moving forward. Or there was, you did a great job with this opportunity and you were able to leverage their goal to be able to make this, skill salient. So why would they use it? And I think that sometimes that type of, combination of having the right resources and materials, but also having a coach yourself of like, how do I do this thing? What we see is that people are able to come to Fidelity pretty quickly once they know how they're being evaluated and what they're doing. And what I think is probably more important is that people want to do it. So there are two types of providers. Well, there's many types of providers, but the providers that don't want to do that are not going to do it. So that comes across pretty easily. Like if they just want to like sit down and chat with someone, like that's not what this intervention is. But for people who then start to see like the impact of what they're doing, they buy in right away. They're like, oh my God, this person is changing before my eyes. Like they're not stressed. They're getting their stuff done. They are finishing their semesters. They are getting good grades. They are feeling good. And students are really managing a lot. So I think the promising components were really around like, who do you train? How do you train them? And then what results do you see? And that was very promising.
I agree. And exciting to see happen. And there's a lot of interest that people are putting into the chat, kind of, this could benefit us, and thinking about how FAST could be implemented and would like to see it implemented in schools. To your point about the FAST on campus study upcoming. Just to sort of wrap up the training piece, somebody had asked about, is there cost associated? And I know that's sometimes, embedded in a grant, and I wonder if you can comment on that.
Yeah. Well, I would love to get into a place where there's not a cost associated, but there is. And so I think just like any other type of intervention that you need to train your staff on, but thinking about like what does it look like and how do we do it? I am open to having those kinds of conversations. I do appreciate the chat. I just opened it up, and so thank you guys for both the nice words about like both needing it, but I think that this is to your point, Debbie, like a tangible skill. You can upskill your workforce by providing this. What I will say is that this is not always the best fit for all types of environments, right? So this is currently designed as a one-on-one. I am designing it as I had alluded to in the earlier slide, for like a first year experience seminar and for a bridge program. And so those offerings will be available soon, and we're testing it. So I think that those are very exciting developments to figure out like how can we scale this. So if you work in a mental health organization and you bill for individualized services, this is perfect for you. You can slide this in. It is a Medicaid reimbursable code. It is a commercially insurance reimbursable service. So it exists to be able to be reimbursed. So when you think about the cost of training, it also then gets displaced by the types of services that you can then bill for. So that is like a pro. If you work at a university, however, it is harder to do one-on-one services. But if your office provides one-on-one services, then this is a great option too. So just thinking about the rightness of fit for the environment, but we will have lots of different types of iterations that could fit different types of contexts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there has been interest in that. I saw that people coming in had asked about, high school and foster, kids coming through foster care. There's a question here about incarcerated folks.
Yes.
Is there room for tailoring this to other folks who really need it? And we are, as you say, wildly interested.
We are, and we're writing a grant for criminally involved or justice involved youth, because we recognize that they have a lot of barriers in front of them. And so if we're not purposefully focusing on how they can be successful, we are missing an opportunity. I would say the same thing for foster care youth, and for youth who are who are born into systems that do not set them up for success. Like people who are born into poverty and lived in impoverished neighborhoods and states, even like their opportunities are different than people who are born into different types of opportunities. So there's a lot of work to be done with a lot of different populations. And what I will say is executive functioning skills is one of those cross-cutting things that it literally doesn't matter that it is helpful for any type of person, right? Whether or not you even have great executive function skills, you can still improve on them. And that's something that we see when we train staff, that they become like really excellent. They are so sophisticated in their skill use.
It definitely helped mine, is what I'm going to say. So, yes, I absolutely agree. And, one of the questions, I guess maybe the last question that I'll bring is, there are some opportunities coming up right through the study, and we're very interested in partnering with you. And there's you mentioned in one of your slides an upcoming FAST Institute, so there will be opportunities to get trained. But what can providers do now, and what can services do now to help their students who might be overwhelmed, struggling to prioritize? Are there strategies that you recommend that they do now
Yeah.
as they help those students? Yeah.
Well, I think that's a very, it's legitimate, which is like, if we don't have this, then what do we do? And I think that anyone who's been close to FAST would say, start with time and task management. That I think is the secret sauce. If someone doesn't have a calendar, uh, we should identify what is the best type of calendar, take all of their syllabi, put all of the dates in their syllabi, of their syllabi into their calendar for both a month view and a weekly view, and get into a habit of checking the calendar regularly. What do I have? What's coming up? What do I need? And I think that those types of approaches are structurally really helpful because it starts to clean up the mess in the playroom, so to speak. So what is floating around all of the places, let's get it into a place, and then let's create our to-do list. What are the things that we need to do today, tomorrow, Wednesday, Thursday, right? So this idea of like doing task by task. And almost everyone feels better once it comes from that stage of like nebulous overwhelm to like, how do I get this done? And then the strategies around managing that. Sometimes you need to ask for flexibility. Sometimes you need to do something, you take something off of your plate that you can't do. Like, all right, maybe I can't go to dinner tonight because I have something due tomorrow. So, but that's, I think where I would start is kind of like cleaning out the extraneous load and teaching to-do lists and teaching calendaring. Those are kind of like, they're not easy wins because they're, it's complex, but there are lots of things out there that can help to support young people to do that and providers to do that. I think those are what I would say is like, that is like a very, it's both structural, and I think the other component is like the physical organization. So if someone comes to you and they always are missing something or forgetting something, then like, okay, let's identify like where do you keep your bag when you go home? Where do you keep this thing? Like how, so this idea of like, how do you physically organize someone? And when I used to work as a sport education counselor, or when I supervised or ran those programs, we would often like go to someone's house or dorm room and like help physically to organize people, because sometimes when the clutter gets too much, you cannot be productive. It is so the same way that we're cleaning out cognitively where people are, like the extraneous, sometimes you have to do that with your workspace. So start with your workspace and be able to help people feel more grounded, because that's how you go from overwhelm and cognitive overload just back to cognitive load. Like, all right, I have these things to do, but sometimes those humps are very difficult.
Yeah, that's really helpful. Dee brought up the fact that these skills are then like often transferable to employment. And I mentioned in the chat that we also have a version of FAST for employment. So if people are interested in that, they can contact you about that as well.
Yeah, I think what I would say is like wherever the entry point is, right? So if you're in school, high school, middle school, college, like teach the skills around being successful in that environment. And school is different than work. But once you learn those skills, you can apply them in other areas. The same thing as your personal life. Like you don't forget to start doing something that you do in your other place. So these are what we would call generalizable skills, transferable skills. What I will say is that there are a set of things that are different at work than at school. So for instance, when you start at school, the cognitive load is really low, right? Because you get the syllabus, you talk a couple, you have some easy classes, you're not doing a lot. That is actually the exact opposite at work. When you start a job, you are drinking from a fire hydrant with a straw. You are just being overwhelmed by information. Your calendar is not your calendar. Your calendar is the company's Outlook calendar, right? If you're starting in a professional job. If you're, starting at CVS, like there is a different set. The environment dictates different types of things. So there are differences. But if you teach these skills and then teach the adaptability of these skills, then people are well suited to go from school to work and from work to school. There are some differences, but there's lots of differences in lots of places. But we have seen good outcomes associated with application when you first teach these in a work setting.
I think that's the end of our questions, but I wonder, Dee, if you can speak to where people can get the slides and the recording, etc. And
And
I
the
personally,
evaluation.
yes, and the evaluation. And I just want to personally say thank you, Michelle. This was great and a lot of information. And there's a lot of love coming to you in the chat and through the emojis flying through right now. Thank you, everybody.
Yes, I want to thank Michelle for the wonderful presentation. I always learn something about myself when I listen to this. And thank you, Debbie, for moderating the questions. And thank you for those of you who attended. We have recorded the webinar, and the recording and the slides will be made available on the Transitions to Adulthood Center for Research's website. And we also have an evaluation that will pop up after you exit the webinar. So we'd really, really appreciate if you'll fill it out, let us know how we did. If there's places we can improve, other things you want to learn about other work that the Learning and Working or Transitions ACR do. And please be on the lookout for future webinars and other tip sheets, blogs, podcast episodes that we produce. And again, thank you everyone for spending some time with us today.
Thank you, folks.